Think about that.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. The board started closed session this evening at 7:02 for the purpose of discussion of employment of employee, actual potential litigation, closed session minutes, discussion review, and the approval of October 19th, 2010 and November 16th, 2010 closed session minutes. We'll start with a roll call. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Conroy? Here. Mrs. Droney?
Here.
Mr. Collins is absent. Mr. Kralquist is absent. Mrs. Ostajic?
Present.
Ms. Hirsch?
Here.
Mrs. Davy?
Present. Thank you. 5 board members present, 2 are absent. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And it is the holiday time of year, so we're going to start our agenda this evening with a performance by the York High School Madrigal Singers, and then we have some student recognition.
York Madrigal Singers are under the direction of Becky, Mary, and Eddie.
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither stand by me, telling yonder peasant who is he, where his dwelling.
So he lives a goodly kind underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence, by St. Agnes fountain.
Bring me flesh and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither, thou and I will see him dine, when we bear them thither. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude winds wild lament and the bitter weather.
Sigh, the night is darker now, and the wind blows stronger. Fails my heart, I know not how, I can go no longer.
Mark my footsteps, good my page, tread thou in them boldly. Thou shalt find no winter's rage, freeze thy blood less coldly. In his master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dinted. Heat was in the very sod, which the saint had printed. Therefore, Christian men, be sure, wealth or rank possessing, ye who now will bless the poor, shall yourselves find blessing. Noel, 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 Noel.
Masters in this world, hear ye all the news today that's brought from o'er the waters. Now rejoice and pray. Shepherds in the hills sat among the silent sheep, and no man spoke more words than had they been asleep. Noel, 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 Noel. Happy are the folk on earth and gone in sorrowing and fear. Noel, 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 Noel. For today the folk are raised up and casted down the proud.
Thank you. We appreciate that wonderful concert. And Dr. Krizik, if you could extend our thanks to Miss Marionetti and to the Madrigal Choir for that special holiday treat. And with that, we have a couple of student recognitions. Dr. Krizik.
The first recognition, I'm going to ask York Principal Diana Smith to share with us the accomplishments of several of her former graduates as it related to their performance on the AP exams. This is an incredible recognition that we are celebrating this evening as it exemplifies the culmination of the success of the entire K-12 district in terms of the performance of our students. Principal Smith?
Good evening, and thank you for taking the time tonight again to recognize some of our students, and in this case, a former student of our district. Tonight, recognizing our AP National Scholars. And I know the board is aware that last year, 422 of the York students took a total of 884 AP tests, with 87% of the students receiving a 3 or more, which is wonderful. The College Board recognizes 3 levels of AP scholars. We had at York last year 33 AP scholars with honors, 51 AP scholars with distinction, and the highest honor, the National AP Scholars, and we had 3 National AP Scholars. 2 of our 3 students are not with us tonight because they're finishing up their finals. So let me introduce first David Baker, whose parents are here. David took 8 AP exams and earned a score of 5 on each of them. David is the son of Barbara and Michael Baker, who are here. His younger brother is in the 8th grade at Sandburg, heading over, as I said, to the big house next year. David is now studying at the University of Minnesota in chemical engineering, and Will and I have had the pleasure of working with David on the York advisory team, and he's also was the manager of Coach Newton's cross-country team, and I understand that he's also managing the cross-country team in college, where he's found a great network of friends. And last but not least, I know the board is aware that David was recognized by the ACT. In fact, last week at a conference, we received a plaque because he received a perfect score of 36 on the ACT. So his parents are here tonight. Also, Merrick. Also, Marek Mrosik is also not able to be here tonight, is the son of Christoph, and Iwa Mrosik also has an older sister who attended York. He pursued a wide variety of AP courses during his time at York, including AP Bio and AP Chem and AP European History, AP Econ, AP Computer Science, and also studied dance while he was there. He's currently studying material engineering at the University of Illinois and working on his finals. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce to you, and I know the board knows Will, but Will Ritter. He's the son of Steve and Nancy Ritter, who are here, and 2 older sisters. He's currently studying, I think, psychology, if I remember right, at Northwestern University. At York, Will was the president of the National Honor Society. He was a member of the York advisory team, the symphonic band, and the soccer and track teams. A true scholar with an exceptional work ethic. I asked Will, as in preparing for tonight, how, as he thought about the impact that AP courses had on him in college, as we try to think about how can we attract more students to take AP coursework. And he said, I think I got a feel for the rigor of college coursework through AP classes. The higher standards and a higher time commitment really had an impact when he got to college. And he said at Northwestern, AP courses can get you out of introductory courses, but also start you on a higher track. And beyond that, he said he wouldn't have made it out of his neuroscience class alive if he hadn't had the background in both AP biology and AP psychology. And would you like to say a few words? So, about your AP coursework.
It's impromptu. I guess, I don't know, taking the AP courses was kind of the natural progression for me in high school, and it was kind of what I was ready for, and it ended up being a really good transition into college work. I think I feel more prepared in my college classes because I'm used to, the higher standards of AP work and, the amount of time you have to put into it.
And how about that neuroscience course? That's a freshman course?
Yeah, it's an intro course, so they say, but it's really not. It's much harder than they advertise, and I didn't discover the they call them CTEC, which is the review system that they have for courses at Northwestern. I didn't discover it until my first midterm when I find all the reviews saying don't take this course. But I definitely, if I didn't have the background in bio and psych, I wouldn't have been able to learn it all.
Great.
First, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming back to the district. I know that you're off at school and you probably have other things you'd like to do if you're home for the holidays, but we appreciate you coming back and giving us the opportunity to recognize your accomplishment. One of the missions of our district is to make sure that our students are achieving their full potential, and the advanced placement tests are a great opportunity for some of our students to really challenge themselves with a more rigorous curriculum. And we're really excited to share your success and the honor that you bring to our district. And with that, I would like to read a proclamation. Whereas the College Board Advanced Placement Program recognizes high school students who have demonstrated college-level achievement through advanced placement courses and exams, and whereas nearly 1.8 million students worldwide took AP exams last spring, and only about 18% performed sufficiently to complete 3 or more exams, earning scores of 3 or higher, with the York Community High School class of 2010 producing a total of 114 AP scholars at 5 levels, which translates to a college credit at more than 3,800 colleges and universities worldwide, including more than 90% of 4-year institutions in the United States. And whereas recognition was awarded to a select few in the National Advanced Placement Scholars category, which is granted to students who have received an average score of at least 4 out of 5 on all AP exams taken and scores of 4 or higher on 8 or more of those exams. And whereas York graduates David Baker, Marek Moresik, and Will Ritter earned this prestigious distinction, with David Baker taking 8 AP exams and earning a top score of 5 on each of them, and Marek Moresik taking 6 tests and earning a top score of 5 on each of them, and Will Ritter taking 8 tests, earning a top score of 5 on 7 of them and 4 on 1 of them. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community School District 205 express their congratulations to the class of these class of 2010 graduates for these outstanding academic accomplishments. Please join me in congratulating Will. Thank you to David Baker's family for joining us tonight, even though David couldn't.
We're looking forward to that. And I would imagine we will see the young Mr. Baker here in 4 years from now, 5 years from now. So thank you very much. We began this evening with hearing some incredible music from the Madrigals, and now this next part of our evening was celebrating the academic achievement, and now we're returning to music. Tonight, John Gaunt, the choral director at Sandburg Middle School, is here to share with us the award, or the honor, that Clara Stazowski had received recently, and how she will be representing both Elmhurst in an upcoming national choir. So both Miss Amy Reed, principal of Sandburg Middle School, and John Gaunt will share with us how Clara earned this high honor and distinction.
I
I actually asked if I could come and introduce Mr. Gaunt to introduce Clara this evening. I think he deserves some of the recognition. As my staff told me as we were sitting there listening to the Madrigal Choir singing tonight, all but 2 of the students are Sandburg students. So it really kind of solidified for me that I do want to give Mr. Gaunt some of the recognition. And I saved an email that I think says it better than I could ever possibly put into words. This email was the first introduction I had to this national choir, and it came from Clara's mother, and she wanted to actually recognize Mr. Gaunt and his student teacher's work. It reads, "Dear Miss Reed, I want to share the gratitude my daughter Clara and I are feeling towards Mr. Gaunt and his student teacher. Mr. Gaunt is sponsoring Clara for the National Honor Choir competition, which is here in Chicago this year. This is an incredible long shot. Only 100 kids are selected from 6,000 entries of the best there is across the country. But the fact that they are encouraging her to go for it anyway is fantastic. There's a complicated audition process that involves rigorous vocal preparation, plus online codes, paperwork, and recording and uploading a timed MP3. Mr. Gaunt and his student teacher stayed after school to meet with us yesterday and helped us develop a complete plan that involves multiple rehearsals, both before and after school, over the next few weeks that will get us through this process. Mr. Gaunt has even extended the coordination to Clara's private voice teacher, while his student teacher has taken on coaching Clara musically and on the Italian pronunciation for the song they've chosen. I really appreciate the extra efforts these 2 very talented teachers are expending to help my child reach for the stars. They are 2 more reasons Sandburg is the school it is. I can't thank them enough." And like I said, I think Mr. Gaunt deserves a lot of the recognition. He did a lot of work here with Clara, and I know she has definitely benefited from it because at our annual winter concert, she was phenomenal. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Gaunt, who will tell you more about the choir.
Good evening. As you know, my name is John Gaunt. I'm the choral director at Sandburg. I want to say school board members, administration, faculty, staff, community, and students, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce to you a talented 8th grade vocal student, member of Sandburg Concert Choir, Clara Stazowski. I selected Clara last May to audition for the National Junior High Honors Choir because she was someone who consistently demonstrated exceptional musicianship, pitch and rhythm accuracy, beautiful tone quality, consistent vocal technique, and solid stage presence. Claire was excited that I selected her, and over the summer she began preparing her materials. The auditions required that she sing a vocal solo, sing America a cappella in the key of G major, and sing 2 scales that represent the range of her voice. So in late September of this school year, we did a recording session at Sandburg after school, and Clara sang that song, America, the 2 scales, and the aria, Sabin Crudele. This piece of music was composed in the 1700s by Antonio Caldera, and it's from an opera, La Costanza in Amor Vince la Inganno. But as we all know, actions speak louder than words. So I've prepared a short excerpt from that recording session for you this evening. So you'll hear in order America, the 2 scales, and Sabin Crudele.
I promise I tested this and it worked earlier. I got plan B. How about if I'll play it through the mic system?
Sure.
Okay, start it.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee Seven Kurele.
I want to say as well that it definitely takes a very concerted effort so that we can make the recording process go as smoothly as possible. And Karen Westendorfer is our accompanist at Sandburg, and so she was playing the piano on the recording as well. So thank you to Karen. So to continue, in November, the selectees were announced, and it was made official that Clara had auditioned against 1,200 other junior high middle school students from all 50 states, and is one out of 300 that were selected. So not only will she represent Sandburg Middle School and Elmhurst, but the state of Illinois in the 2011 National Junior High Middle School Honor Choir, which will perform at the American Choral Directors Association National Convention in March 2011 on the great stage at the Auditorium Theater in Chicago, Illinois. I'd also like to add that Clara is the 5th student from Sandburg to be selected for such a national recognition in choral singing, and only the 2nd student to have auditioned and been selected in the same school year for both the state Music Educators Junior High Middle School Honor Choir and the National Honor Choir for junior high middle school students. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Mr. Gaunt, thank you for coming this evening, and I'm going to thank you on behalf of our district for these wonderful students that you're helping to train. I also would probably say her family gets some credit for some of the support with tutors, but Clara, what a joy it is to have you here and to recognize your talent. I went to the website for the ACDA, and they talked through some of the numbers. Clara was Illinois is represented by only 3 students, so we're excited that one of those 300 are ours, and out of only 3 that came out of the state of Illinois. With that, I would like to read a proclamation. Whereas the American Choral Directors Association National Junior High School and Middle School Honor Choir's purpose is to promote excellence in choral music through performance, composition, publication, research, and teaching. And whereas this program encourages excellence on the part of the individual students and encourages further music study and vocal artistry, and whereas Clara Stazowski, an 8th grade student at Sandburg Middle School, was one of 300 chosen from across all 50 states to represent the state of Illinois and Elmhurst Community School District 205 at the ACDA National Event to be held in Chicago in March 2011, and whereas Clara was among 1,200 students who competed and auditioned at a level of difficulty requiring the singing of America, 2 scales representing vocal range, and a prepared piece for which Clara chose Sabin Crudell, and I'm sure I didn't say that right.
Don't worry, it took me like a long time.
Thank you, Clara. You're very kind. It was sung entirely in Italian, and whereas Clara is the 5th Sandburg student to achieve this honor under the 16-year tutelage of choral director John Gaunt, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community School District 205 express congratulations to the student and this teacher for their outstanding accomplishment. Please join me in congratulating them. We are going to just take a couple-minute recess for any of those individuals that were recognized tonight. If you want to stay for the rest of the agenda, you're welcome to. If you want to take this opportunity to exit, you can feel free to do so also. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Dr. Krizik.
The first item is more of an informational item. Every 5 years, all school districts in the state of Illinois undergo what's called a comprehensive compliance visit. The Regional Office of Education, on behalf of the Illinois State Board of Education, comes in and assesses the district's compliance with procedures, policies, and regulations related to the operation of schools. We take this compliance visit very seriously because it leads to the designation of recognition as a school district. In the event any deficiencies are identified, we do have time to remediate those, but our goal will be to have a compliance visit with no deficiencies or as minimal deficiencies as possible. The Cabinet has already begun reviewing their role and responsibilities with each aspect of the compliance probe, and building principals have also been given that information and are also will be engaged in the process. It'll be 3 days, February 22nd through the 24th, at which time most of us will be fully engaged in meeting with the representatives from the regional office who will be conducting the compliance visit. I know as a board you've been working hard to complete the policy review process to ensure that we have all of the policies in place. Tonight you are going to be acting on a second reading and adoption of a policy that is required to be in effect by January 1, 2011. So tonight's action will put us in compliance with that policy. And then subsequent action coming forth in January and February should also ensure that from a policy standpoint, we will be in compliance at the time of the review. We will not receive the report on the compliance visit until later in the year, possibly sometime during the summer, at which time we'll receive a comprehensive report. It affects both buildings and grounds, as well as human resources, as well as curriculum, as well as policy and procedural review. So we anticipate bringing forth those results to you 6 to 7 months from now, and hopefully presenting to you a favorable report. Any questions about the compliance review? The next...
Can I just ask one question? From our last review, were there any substantial items that came out? And what's the process to address when the things that are identified?
They either identify specific solutions that have to be put in place or show evidence of. Timelines are established for any deficiencies. Some are very aggressive timelines, some are less aggressive. If there were any items identified in the last compliance review visit as being deficient, and those occur again, that puts us in a less favorable position as it relates to recognition. So I don't have the report from 5 years ago that was before I arrived here, Mrs. Osachik, but we will be comparing those, and we have looked at those, but I cannot speak, off the top of my head right now what those were. But again, we take this very seriously because it's a significant piece.
Okay.
The next item is also somewhat of a informational item. As you know, we have the retirement of 2 elementary principals, Stephen Smith from Hawthorne and Mary Ann Kalis from Lincoln. We also have 2 cabinet-level vacancies that will before next school year, and that will be the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources due to David Blatchley's resignation. And as we know, Ms. Masterton is retiring in October. However, we anticipate wanting that her replacement of the Assistant Superintendent of Business and Operations to come on board a little bit earlier than her retirement date of October 6th, so we can assist in a transition and or, assign Ms. Masterton other responsibilities during her remaining few months while she is here. We have posted those positions. We have put those positions out to all of the professional organizations. They are posted on our website. We have a deadline date of February 11th for all of those positions. We have 3 plans, 3 different options for completing the process. Option A is to review all of the applications received, identify a group of 10 to 15 candidates for each position to do an initial screening, narrow that down to, I'll say, 3 to 5 candidates for each position, and then prepare a list of finalists for the incoming superintendent to make selections. That's option A. Option B is, depending on the date and time when you select the next superintendent, and depending on the urgency of the hiring of the decisions based on the pool of candidates we receive. Option B is that we will complete the hiring process for the principals for Lincoln and Hawthorne and leave the cabinet positions available for the next superintendent to make the selection. Option C is that all 4 positions will go through the entire interview and selection process done by this administration. Again, timing will dictate that, as well as the candidate pool and our ability to recruit the best candidates for all of those positions. I have communicated with PTA Council what some of the timelines and the 3 option scenarios are for the selections, particularly of the building principals, because I believe the constituencies of both Lincoln and Hawthorne are very anxious to know what the process was going to be. The process for the principal selection will very much parallel the process we have been using the last 2 years, and that is that we will review all applications that we receive. Again, narrow it down to, I'll say, 10 to 15 candidates. I'll have a very small committee involved with myself that will do a screening interview of all of those candidates, and narrow it down again to 3 to 5. I'll say 5 at the outside, is generally 3. And then we'll have 3 stakeholder groups interview those. We'll have a group of parents, we'll have a group of staff, and then we'll have a group of district and school administrators. Those individuals will interview with all 3 groups. All 3 groups will give feedback. And then ultimately at the end, the prevailing top candidate will spend a more in-depth one-on-one interview with myself. And then from that point forward, we either make a recommendation or not make a recommendation to the Board of Education. So the process is rigorous, and it also includes a full reference check as part of the process.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik. Mrs. Davy.
Dr. Krizik, when you outlined the 3 options, when will you know which of those how will you determine when you move from option A to option B to option C?
Some of it depends on the timeline that you will establish for the selection of the next superintendent, so some of that is contingent upon that. If you determine that your timeline for the selection of the next superintendent is not until the end of March, beginning, that may be too long for us to wait to hold candidates that long in abeyance, and so that will potentially move us to option C. If your timeline is to appoint and select a superintendent by mid-March, option A or B will go into effect. But again, some of it's contingent upon a process that you put in place and anticipated timelines. But I'm sure we'll be communicating with one another what those timelines look like. Our goal is to do the stakeholder group interviews the last week of February. So we will be identifying those finalists by the last week of February. Generally, you'd like to not have those finalists wait any more than a week to determine what the outcome of those interviews are. Certainly there can be extenuating circumstances that can be explained to the candidates, but we would like to be able to be in a position to recruit and hire the best candidates possible for these key administrative roles in the district.
If I could follow up, it's true that all 4 of these positions are direct reports to the superintendent in currently, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
I think that this is really critical for us as a board to recognize that we have 4 direct reports to a superintendent that are going to be in a hiring process, and there's a transition to superintendents. And I know if I were applying for a job, I would probably need to know who I was going to be working with and working for, and who was going to be my evaluator and my direct reports. So I think that we're just going to need to keep that in mind as we move forward with our deliberations and our selection process, because I understand why, especially at the schools looking for principals, how important it is that they can, as rapidly as possible, identify who have a good process in place. But I also understand that we want the best candidates for the long term in this district, and because of that, I think we're really going to need to try to work very carefully so that we can have a new superintendent a part of this process in some way, just so that the candidates know who they will be working for.
Ms. Hirsch.
Dr. Krizik, I think we all know as a board what the numbers look like when we are posting teaching positions within the district. And we have an excellent reputation, and we have excellent, phenomenal, outstanding response rates when it comes to the number of people who do want to come contribute and become part of the District 205 organization. And this is off the top of your head, and I don't know that you can answer it, but can you help me understand, or help us understand, what our typical response is for? We have hired a couple of principals in the last few years, and just give us an idea of the number, ballpark, of candidates who have applied to come to District 205 for those principalship positions. And I know that the jobs have been up for, I think, maybe 2 weeks, or if we've had any applications at this point starting in the process.
We have had applications already, and I'll answer it in a different way. It's the percentage of candidates with the appropriate credentials that we're most concerned of. So regardless if we have 100 people apply, we generally see that only 20 to 25% of the actual candidate pool possesses the credentials and certification and or experience necessary as outlined in the job description. So we already do have people applying for the position, and of course I've scanned those, but the deadline isn't until February 11th, so I'm not as concerned. When we look at someone like Ms. Masterton's position, the pool of those candidates is going to be ultimately much smaller because there's a finite number of qualified individuals that possess the appropriate school business officials certification. We already have lots of individuals in the private sector applying for this position, but the position requires the school business officials endorsement. It's required, it's necessary, and so while I can at some point in time give you the total number of applicants, it could be misleading based on the possessing the required credentials. I know that when we had posted a cabinet position for the Director of Communications, we had a significant number of applications, but not all possess the background in or experiences. The current economic climate also drives the number of applicants for some unique positions, and that will apply to human resources too. We do require someone that possesses a Type 75 certificate, so that's going to be critical that we have someone that has the appropriate certification in that position as well. Most likely for the principal positions, we might see more than 80 individuals apply for the position. It could be higher than that, but at the end of the day, when we do our screenings, we are not having difficulty narrowing it down to a candidate pool of screening 10 to 15 individuals. We don't see that, oh my gosh, we have to choose from half of those, we have to screen half based on what their experiences are. So it certainly will depend, and certainly people will be making a lot of different decisions in this economic climate and risk-taking with regards to changing positions at this point in time. Administrative positions are non-tenured positions, and depending on what sort of contract is offered, whether or not that is considered to be enticing enough to move to another district. So, those are some decisions individuals make when they change positions. Ms. Davies' point, most likely while all 4 positions are direct reports, cabinet positions are probably the most critical of all positions because that's the person you're working with and for on a daily basis. And, those are the ones that probably, ideally, in a perfect world, should have the involvement of the next superintendent.
Mrs. Conroy. In the last few years, we've had many new principals in the district, and I'd really like to see us give consideration, some serious consideration to elevating some of the existing employees we have within our district. I think we have some really qualified individuals, and I'm just curious as to if there's any type of consideration given to someone who has been in the district as opposed to the tens and possibly hundreds that come from outside of the district.
Ms. Conroy, every application that we receive, both internal and external candidates, are given serious consideration. In some cases, there is a disincentive for an internal candidate to apply because depending on where a staff member is on the salary schedule, it is not financially in their best interest to apply for a principalship. We've had instances where teachers are making more than what we pay our principals, and they're not working a 12-month year. They're working a 9-month year. So, you know, there is not always an incentive for all internal candidates to apply because there's not a financial incentive to do so. But every internal candidate is given serious consideration. And we have interviewed internal candidates, and we have put forth internal candidates as part of the final 3 for several positions these past few years.
I just think with the amount of professional development that we prioritize for our teachers, I'd like to see us advance more of our own employees.
Mrs. Derone. Has there been any thought given to hiring interims for any of these positions, given the uncertainty of the superintendent position?
We have not given consideration to interims for any of these positions at this point in time. When I look at the position of the assistant superintendent for HR, that will be a 3rd person in 3 years. That is a lot of change for a critical, viable department that has a tremendous amount of work to do. To put another interim in that position doesn't necessarily provide the necessary support and direction that the rest of the administrators need with regard to that particular position. As it relates to the assistant superintendent for finance, one is it requires someone to be here for 261 days. The rules for interims, if it's a retired individual, restricts them to only working 100 days. The new rules in effect for next year. Any individuals selecting to go into any interim position that a school district offers for 100 days must put their retirement benefits in abeyance, and their 100-day salary must include TRS deductions. There is a huge disincentive for many individuals to do interims going forward in those positions. The nature of the principalship is such that it does require those are our 2 largest schools. We would not considering putting in a retired principal in either of those positions for 100 days. Just the nature of the number of staff evaluations, the support, the initiatives that need to be put in place. I don't think it would be in our best interest to consider interim solutions for any of the positions.
We have a special board meeting scheduled for January 4th to talk about the search process, and at that point we will be firming up the calendar as a group. School Exec Connect provided me with just a sample one, but we really have to work out those dates. What I would say, it's premature to be thinking about an interim anything. We're starting our search process. While the change in leadership will make this process a little bit more complex, this district has a tremendous amount to offer, and we've been able to attract high-quality candidates in the past. So I don't think we should be thinking at this point that we're not going to be successful in our search process. There's no indicators that would be so. So yes, this does make it a little bit more challenging because there's a piece of the puzzle that for some candidates, they might like to see and understand that prior to taking a placement. In my reference checks with the various individuals that had worked with these firms, several of those districts had placed superintendent and other cabinet members through the same search process. So this isn't anything that's never been done before. So yes, we need to move forward. And Dr. Krizik, we had asked you to put together a process. So we appreciate you offering different options. And we, as we get further down the timeline, we will have to make specific decisions on which way we want to go. But at this point, it's gathering of the most qualified candidates, and that is something that's already moving forward on all fronts. So thank you for that update. And we will move forward. We have our next item, which is policy manual update. Ms. Hirsch was not able to attend the last policy meeting, but we had a meeting last week. We got through most of the open issues. We have 2 remaining policies, and I'm not going to be able to find the numbers readily, but one is what is our instructional vision for our students, and that's something that as board members we agreed that the drafts that were put in there, they were too vanilla and they didn't really reflect the values of our district. So as board members, each of us were going to bring forth some of our ideas for it, send them to Ms. Hirsch, copy myself in case she's not available to carry it forward. And from there, we would put together a couple of draft options because that process seemed to work well, having some of the basic ideas down and a couple different options. There was one other one that we were going to have Ms. Smith work on. So we should have the 2 draft options back for our next January board meeting for us to look at and react to. We're not planning on having another committee of the whole meeting, and we were able to get through the issues on all the other ones. So I appreciate everybody's work, and Ms. Hirsch, the policy committee, and Ellen Walsh deserves major kudos for the time she's put into this too. So we are moving forward. Are there any other comments that you'd like to make on behalf of the policy committee, Ms. Hirsch?
No, thank you for continuing to move the policy process forward. It is one of our, as a board, key objectives to get to make sure that we are all ready for our compliance visit, because the board's policies are reviewed as part of that compliance visit as well. So we need to make sure that we get all of our work completed on time in a timely manner. So I think it's still my understanding that we will have some discussion, I believe, on the 2 outstanding policies at the first January meeting, which I believe is January 8th, with the intention of going ahead to first reading of the entire policy manual and the first business meeting of the year, which is January 25th. Which the entire policy manual will be posted for public consumption to review. And then we would be going to a second reading and adoption on February 22nd, which happens to be the first day of our compliance visit. So we are squeaking just underneath the line, but this work should be completed after an almost 2-year process. So thank you very much for carrying on without me, and I appreciate it.
And just a final clarification, our 2 outstanding policies are 6:10 and 8:10. And I'm going to continue on. I think you had one additional item. Summer school courses.
And I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Sullivan to introduce the process for the York Summer School course proposals.
Well, I'm going to introduce Dave Creech again. Come on up, Dave. Just keep coming. Last meeting, we presented to you new coursework for York for 2011 and 12 school year. It's hard to even say that, or 2011 and 12 school year. Tonight we've got 3 courses that Dave is going to talk to you about, that these are summer-only options that we would like to provide for this upcoming summer. So I will turn it over to Dave.
Thank you. And once again, I would like to thank the Board of Education for allowing me to come forward with these 3 proposals for summer school. I believe that each of you has received a detailed description, but I'm looking forward to providing you with a brief summary of the proposals, and I hope I'm able to answer any questions that you may have about them. I feel like the timing is perfect this evening when we had a recognition of the College Board Advanced Placement National Scholars, since each of these proposals is specific to increasing enrollments in our AP courses. So the proposals are directly linked to our efforts being made to increase the opportunities for students to pursue AP coursework. The goal of each of these classes is to provide students with a better understanding of course expectations, including pacing, but also exposure to the reading, the type of discussions, and lab activities in science, but also assessments that are similar to those that students will experience when they are enrolled in the AP courses. So as we were developing these courses, we thought long and hard about who would benefit from the courses. A student like Will Ritter described his experience as being sort of a natural progression, and we certainly recognize that those students are out there. We also know that there's a population of students that could potentially do very well in AP courses, but that may need or benefit from some additional support. And we think that these courses can offer that support. So jumping in and looking at the first proposal, the title of the course, and they're consistent across the content areas, but the first that I'd like to just introduce is Preparing for AP English Courses. And initially there was conversation about how best to title each of these, but ultimately we steered away from using the specific AP designation right up front, and recognized that we were really trying to build skills in English classes, in science classes, and in social studies classes. And so the name could and should be consistent across each of them. In the English course, we are looking to introduce students to English instruction that, as I said, is consistent with the rigor and pacing found in the AP Lit class. Students will engage in reading, writing, listening activities that will serve as a basis for instruction in these classes. They will develop their analytical thinking, their nonfiction writing, and it will be done, again, in the context of this AP format. Preparing for AP science courses is designed to support students really in three courses, specifically the AP biology class, AP physics, and AP chemistry. And so what we thought about were sort of the skills that transcend each of these classes. And we recognized that students will have to have strong reading skills, just like in the English and just like you'll hear about in the social studies class. But in addition, they will also need a mastery of lab procedures and skills, developing reports, developing scientific reasoning skills. And so that is a significant part of this class. Students will be asked to analyze data, develop graphs, interpret graphs, but also, again, there will be exposure to AP-style prompts so that students can more easily transition from the summer class into the actual class that they would be enrolled in during summer school. And then the third course is preparing for AP social studies courses. And the timing of this, I feel like, is very good as well, since we have a proposal that we brought forward at the last meeting to allow sophomores to take the AP U.S. Government and Politics class and to allow that this course count towards the government graduation requirement. We also have and have had the AP European History course that many sophomores have taken. So this class is designed to support students in these two classes, although many of the skills that they develop here will and can be applied to other AP social studies classes. Again, we're hoping to develop students their reading, writing, thinking, and discussion skills in the context of a social studies setting. There will be an emphasis on skill development, study habits, pacing, and essentially making students aware of the different level of rigor, and I think even as Will referenced again, the amount of time that is required on the part of the student to be successful in the course. Additional time will be spent working with students again on those assessments. In these AP courses, there's a requirement that students are familiar and are able to respond to document-based questions and also free response questions as well. So those were the 3 summer proposals. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Ms. Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Creech. One of the charts you showed us at the end of the English advanced placement showed enrollment numbers, and we saw numbers 40s, 50s, in 209, 210, 74, and then this last year 285. So could you help us understand why in 1 year, was it a change in the amount of courses that were offered? Was there a concerted effort at the high school to move to, could you just, because
Sure.
that's a dramatic difference, and it's very laudable to see that we're already moving in such a positive direction, but how?
How we did that, really not a mystery. We have changed really the expectation that junior honors class, and so this year students are moving directly into the advanced placement literature and composition class, and then during the senior year they're moving into the advanced placement language and composition class. So we have an additional offering, but also it has to do with students moving out of English 10 the sophomore year directly into an AP class during the junior year. So that's really how it happened. And then, of course, seniors moving on from that AP class into this other as well. So it has to do with the restructuring, really.
Mr. Collins.
Mr. Creech, I apologize for not asking this question in advance. I'm not trying to stump you,
Sure.
but do you happen to know off the top of your head what percentage of York students take an AP class before they graduate? Is that something on the tip of your tongue?
It isn't. I know it,
That's
and
fine.
I can see the charts in my head.
Again,
but,
I apologize for not
that's
asking
okay.
in advance. But what I want to say overall is I absolutely commend you for taking this initiative in preparing kids for AP classes. And not only the preparedness, but the tone that it sets for the school. That York is supporting their students and encouraging their students to take AP classes. Do you have plans for supporting kids during the school year in their AP classes?
I can say that the teachers provide the most beneficial and direct support to students. We don't have any sort of outside tutoring outside the school day, but certainly I can speak in science and social studies. All of these classes, the teachers are incredibly dedicated and spend a lot of time working with kids in study groups in the evening, on weekends, especially as they move closer into the AP testing season in the spring. But that's really where the support comes from. There's also a strong network among the students that take the classes, so they develop study groups and then work in small groups, but then also in larger groups with the teachers. And that's probably the best and most direct support that they receive.
Okay.
Mr. Collins, I think we have one piece of information.
Oh, thank you.
It's actually on the dashboard. In last year's graduating class, 53% of the students of last year's graduating class had taken one or more AP course.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And can I just ask you one more thing? And actually a reaction to a comment that you made is I since August I've taken 2 days off of work and spent both of those days at York High School and got to witness firsthand a lot of great teaching that is going on at York. So my next question is what plans do we have, or what plans can we make to enhance the summer school program in future years to encourage kids not only to move up from honors to AP, but kids to move up a level in general, whether they're in one level of math and have the ambition to move up to the next, or one level of science and have the ambition to move up to the honors curriculum in science. What can we do? What plans can we make in the future to encourage that move as well?
And some of that is going on. We have a course in place specifically in math for students coming from the middle school so that they can more easily transition into the honors math program. I feel like this is a really good first step. These classes can benefit kids, and it's not just sort of restricting enrollment in these classes until, say, the junior year. We're allowing sophomores, kids coming out of the freshman year, to enroll in these classes so that they can transition easily. But I think it's doing what you're suggesting, looking at specifically where there are gaps in the curriculum, where kids are on the borderline, and developing supports for them, whether the support comes through summer school or maybe something that happens through the school year, but always sort of keeping in the back of our minds, or the front of our minds, that we really do want to push kids into the most rigorous courses.
Okay. Yeah, thank you again for some very good work here.
Thank you.
Ms. Hirsch. I have a couple of questions, and they stem from some of the discrepancies that were in the detailed plans from the 3 different departments. And I'm hoping that you can help me understand the way that this is. I've been reading this, is that there are 3 separate courses that we're looking to offer this coming summer, that do not count to meet a graduation requirement, but they are credit courses offered over the summer, and that they're specific to a particular department, science or social studies or English. In reviewing, I greatly appreciate the format of the document that we're using to describe the courses that we're looking to add to our course load. But there are some discrepancies, and I'm trying to understand and resolve them. For instance, in social studies, I believe all that you need to do to be encouraged or qualified to take that pre-AP social studies course is to have finished your freshman year. For science, the requirement is that you are enrolled in an AP science course the following year. And in English, if you're registered for English 10, we're encouraging you to take this course over the summer, which, there's different standards that are being held, for the 3 curricular areas. And in reading the comments, one of the questions in the document is, do we anticipate this particular course is going to lead to additional new courses that we're looking to add? And in science, I believe it was no, we're not anticipating adding any new. But in the other subject areas, we were saying, well, maybe we would offer another pre-AP course for U.S. history, so that you would be prepared for AP U.S. history. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but for each of these courses, we're asking to develop the course materials, right? And so we're incurring costs for each of the courses that we are looking to develop. So I'm very sensitive to spending dollars where we are now. It's a very admirable goal. I honestly had expected to see one course coming forward, which was preparing for an AP level, a college level course that was going to be focused on the intensive writing requirements, the reading requirements, some of the structures like DBQs and FRQs. I have a student that's taking her first AP course, and it took the first month to make the adjustment to the language and the pacing. So I was expecting to see one course recommendation coming forward, and instead we're getting 3, each of which are going to require some dollars spent. So again, there's some discrepancies across in terms of if we see this going to be growing, these pre-AP courses, and I think I want to make sure that we understand the process, what it is that we're looking to do. Are we anticipating that for each AP course that York will be offering, we would also have a preparatory course to prepare a student who's interested in that course to be prepared to take that course in the fall? Mm-hmm. Is it a requirement for scheduling? Say somebody takes the preparatory course and then says, I don't want to do the AP course, or all of a sudden we have 20 new students signed up who want to take an AP science course, and we don't have the staffing or the scheduling to handle that. So I'm trying to understand the big picture, what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I agree with Mr. Collins. We want to prepare students for more rigorous material, but I want to make sure we're very thoughtful about the structure and the approach that we're taking as we begin on this journey, because I can see it. There's always scope creep. There's always one more thing that's a good idea. But in a time when we're cutting budgets, I want to make sure that we're very thoughtful about expanding new curriculum offerings. So, very long-winded question, but if you wouldn't mind helping me understand it.
Can I interrupt? But before you respond to hers, because I have one that sort of layers on top of it, can you just talk a little bit about how we developed? Is this best practice? What are we modeling after? How did we determine that these are the courses that we need to get? And I agree. I think that our summer school needs to get away from not away from catching kids up. We need to have that opportunity, but it also needs to afford kids that want the opportunity to move forward. So, I'm in full support of extending those opportunities. I like Ms. Hurst, I'm just trying to understand how the concept of these specific things were developed. Should it be one skill level? Are these specific enough to be really individual course? And are we modeling after our peer districts? How did we determine the format of how we wanted to structure these?
Sure. I think in answer to one of your questions, have we modeled this? Have we seen this in some other schools? And the answer is yes. I feel like we've taken a relatively conservative approach to these proposals. I have seen, specifically at Stevenson, where they offer a pre-AP course for some specific science courses. For instance, AP chemistry. There's an AP chemistry prep course offered in the summer. What we did was we looked at the areas where we have significant enrollments in AP classes, so certainly our English classes, social studies, and also our science classes. And then we sort of looked at what instructional themes transcend some of the courses. So, are there things, would it be nice to offer a single AP class, prep class that would enable students to build skills in English and science and social studies? The answer is yes. One of the constraints that we face, though, is that the classes and the expectations are very different in those content areas. So I feel like we sort of narrowed it as far as we could, or the offering. So in English, potentially we could have come forward with a proposal for a pre or a prep class in AP language and composition and another for literature and composition. But we felt like if we were able to engage kids in the pace of the reading, the general expectations, building those critical thinking skills, those things apply to both classes, and yet the things they do in English are unique and different from sort of the skills that are developed in social studies classes, and those are distinct and different from those in science classes, where there's a focus on critical thinking in the context of science. As I said, developing graphs, charts, the scientific method, and so on. So I don't feel like it's possible to develop a single course that would adequately develop skills across all of these content areas. It's just too broad. But that being said, we tried to focus on the things that were universal in AP European, in social studies, for instance, AP European, AP government, and again in science. So in the future, as we continue to develop supports for kids, I think it's possible that we may pursue a model like Stevenson, where they offer specific prep classes for specific courses, but I don't feel like we're there yet. I don't feel like we've accomplished all that we can with these courses. These serve a purpose, those serve a different purpose, but as we are looking specifically to try and bring as many kids into the courses as we can, I feel like we're able to accomplish that with these proposals. Now, in the future, maybe we would want to, I don't want to say, I don't see us offering specific classes next year, but I really wouldn't want to say for sure until we see how things go, until we're able to gather feedback from students, from parents, so we have a better understanding of the kids and their experiences.
I do have a little experience as a parent of a child who would be considering taking one of these courses, and I think I'd really like to see us firm up what the prerequisites are when they are printed in the summer school brochure, so that we are very clear and consistent. There is a discrepancy now. Anybody can take English, and you only take science if you're enrolled in an AP course. And I think a consistent message, if we are very clear about the purpose of this particular course and what the student is expected to get out of that course, I think we should have consistent messaging across all three course offerings and allow the student to choose, which path they're ready to challenge themselves. So I understand that, but
Sure.
I do think that we need to be very clear in our communications who the audience, because as a parent, what we get is a Word document which has the course description in it, and then you go talk to other parents and find out, okay, what's the right thing to do for my child to make sure that they're where they want to be by the end of their experiences at York. There's no background information on this, it's new, so I think the clearer that we can be on the prerequisite, who the intended audience is, what the purpose of this course is, I think that is going to best serve students and parents so they can self-select and understand we're communicating clearly what our intention is for the course, and hopefully the course is going to be able to meet their expectations.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I wanted to mention, I know I didn't respond to the difference between sort of the prereq or how a student is able to enter English and social studies versus science. With science, in each of these, whether you're talking about AP Physics, AP Chemistry, even Bio, there are a couple of things that go into that. One is the students, in addition to the students' background and understanding in science, there's also a math component to it, and so that's an essential part of it, that they are developing those skills in a separate math class that would enable them to be successful here. So on the surface, it looks like it's more restrictive in science, but that's in part because of the other requirements that are necessary for success.
Mrs. Conroy.
Thank you, Mr. Creech. I think for sharing your thought process. It sounds like this has been very well thought out. And to me, I think the most important thing that this is going to encourage is I think AP classes can be very intimidating to many students. And I think by us going on this path, I think we're going to encourage many more students to partake in AP classes, and therefore we're going to see our academic achievement really increase. So thank you very much.
Mr. Collins.
I can just make two comments. Mr. Creech, just to get my 2 cents in there, I think that Stevenson model is the right one to pursue, and my personal opinion is you're right in pursuing it. But as kind of a corollary to that, and I realize this is a little off the topic, but Stevenson has got 4,000 kids in their high school. York has 2,600. So they've got some economies of scale of just having more kids so that these courses fill up and that they can afford to teach them. Have we pursued at all teaming up with other high schools in the area to perhaps coordinate our summer school programs? And by achieving economies of scale of more than one high school, making sure that between multiple high schools there are plenty of rich courses offered to all of these kids, and therefore ensuring that we have the proper enrollment to make it feasible and economical to run the classes.
I can't say that we have looked to other schools specifically to team up. I know that there's work being done with COD to ensure that there are either parallel offerings. in terms of the enrollments with courses like this, I don't think we've offered anything like this in the past. I think we will have pretty solid enrollment numbers, and I would expect that they would run. It's certainly something that we can look towards in the future if we see that we may not have enough to run a specific course, that we could reach out to a neighboring school. But I don't believe that we've done that to this point.
I have one final question. This is a new initiative for us, which, as I said before, I support, offering our kids more opportunity to try to move ahead. How are we going to measure whether these are the right programs, they're structured in the right ways, how prepared they're making our kids? And, can you talk a little bit about the process of how we're going to track this and look at it and determine how it needs to get changed, or if we need to start from scratch, or we just need to evolve it, and how that will look?
Sure. I think one of the ways that we'll be able to gauge success is by looking at the interest, specifically to begin with, the interest in the class. Do we have large numbers of kids signing up and expressing an interest in taking these classes? So that's a starting place to look, but also talking with the kids about their experiences as they leave the class. Certainly that's something that we'll want to hear from them is what was the value? How do you feel as you entered that class? But we will also look to specific numbers, and again, it's looking for growth in our enrollments. I think it's a matter of reaching out to kids that we know may have the skill level, but for one reason or another they didn't sign up for the class, looking to them and saying, hey, is this something that you've thought about? And actively reaching out to kids to put them here so that they feel more comfortable and more confident as they enter that AP class. Also, we would want to measure success by looking at average scores, but we also know, of course, as you increase the enrollment, that, the average score may drop. So that isn't necessarily a negative thing, but it's an indicator that more kids are going into the class. And so those are some of the things that I can imagine we would look at.
Thank you. Ms. Hirsch?
Actually, I'd like to expand on that. I'd really encourage you to take a look at tracking some students' performance, their first AP course, and if you can find a cohort of students that did take the preparatory course before they were enrolled in the AP course, and see if you can compare how those students performed at the end of the AP course with a group of students who, the kids who did and the kids who didn't take it. If this was in fact their first AP course, see if you've got a control group and see if you can, predict how they're going to,
Sure.
The goal is that they'll be well prepared and do well, and let's see what kind of a result we get.
Mm-hmm.
And just one final comment, a question. How are we going to introduce this, promote this, make sure there's an understanding of what this is and what this is intended to accomplish? Most of these programs are not for incoming freshmen. They're for students with upper class, so you don't have that introductory night with the parents to sort of go through the changes. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. I think that the starting place is going to be the meetings that the counselors have with each of the grade levels. So they pull together the current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. They talk about the courses that are available and the whole registration process, but there's also an opportunity to talk specifically about these classes and encourage kids to, if they have questions about them, talk with their teachers, but also talk with their counselors and so on. So I think that's one way to get that message out. But certainly as we're communicating with parents in the community about the summer school offerings, something that would call attention to the new offerings and having contact information where beyond just reading that little description, that they have somebody they can call in the Student Services Department, the counselors. I think those are some of the ways that we can get the message out.
No other board questions or comments, so thank you. We appreciate the time and effort put forth in bringing this forward to the board.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item on our agenda is the superintendent's agenda. We have one action item. I'm sorry, I'm skipping through the agenda. Nope, my apologies, I paged down too quickly there. Our next item is approval of the board meeting minutes. We have the November 16th minutes posted for board approval. Are there any amendments or corrections to those minutes as presented? Seeing none, they are approved as presented. We have the superintendent's consent agenda. Are there any items any board members would like removed for discussion from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'll accept a motion. Mrs. Davy?
I move for the approval of the superintendent's consent agenda items A through H as listed in the agenda.
Thank you. Moved by Mrs. Davy, seconded by Mrs. Conroy. We have approval of financial information, so we need a roll call. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostajic?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mr. Kalquist is absent.
Thank you. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. That motion carries. Now we move forward to the superintendent's agenda action item. We have one item on it, the adoption of a new policy. Dr. Krizik, do you have an introduction for this, or is this for the policy committee?
This is actually the second reading and adoption of the policy that was discussed at the November board meeting. So this is the next step in the process and more of a formality. So unless board members have any additional questions between last meeting and this meeting, it would just really require action.
Ms. Hirsch?
I move that the Board of Education adopt as second reading the new policy number 5405-11, Food Allergy Management Program, which, when adopted, will become effective immediately and subsequently be added to the policy manual of the Board of Education, Chapter 5 students.
Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Collins. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? I'm sorry. We need to have a roll call because we need a supermajority for a policy change. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostajic?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy? Yes. Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Mr. Kalquist is absent. Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Thank you. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. That motion carries. Our next item is upcoming meetings. There are 2 posted on our agenda. Our 2 regular meetings, Tuesday, January 11th. We have a Board of Education workshop meeting here at the District 205 Center at 7:30, and on Tuesday, January 25th, also 7:30 here at the District 205 Center. There's also a special meeting on January 4th. The location for that is to be announced because we're competing for space with all the other things going on in the district. The sole purpose of that meeting is to meet with our executive search firm and come up with a specific calendar and narrow down the approach options that we have for the superintendent search. So we will have an agenda forthcoming for that, and as soon as we can figure out a location for that, that will also be communicated. We do have an action coming out of closed session. May I have a motion, Mrs. Davy?
I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution authorizing notice to remedy.
Thank you. Moved by Mrs. Davy, seconded by Ms. Conroy. Is there any board discussion? Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy? Yes. Mr. Kalquist is absent. Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostajic?
Yes. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. That motion carries. Our next item on our agenda is board communication. Are there any items any board members would like to share at the board table? Mrs. Davy?
Nothing really to report other than Mr. Collins and I attended the annual TIF meeting. Dr. Krizik and Ms. Masterton were there with us, and there was really no new or surprise. There were no surprises coming out of that meeting. This is the annual meeting with all the taxing bodies that are impacted by the 3 TIFs in Elmhurst, and so we were there for a Monday night meeting at 6:00.
Mr. Collins.
If I can just add one or two things to that. In TIF number 3, which is the shopping center that Dominic's is anchored by Dominic's, Sears, and Kohl's. The city had originally done a kind of a straight line historical trend line of rising property values, and very creatively in that TIF would grant a 3% rise in the EAV for that property to the other taxing bodies, including Community Unit School District 205. However, that rising trend in property prices has come to a screeching halt, and in future years we can't count on that 3% increase year after year, and the city made it clear to us. And so I think that is kind of one major change that they brought up in that meeting.
Thank you. Mrs. Gironi.
This is typically the meeting that looks backwards, right? And talks about what has happened in the TIFs after they get their audit and so forth. It's sort of a wrap-up for the last year. Do we have meetings scheduled that are forward-looking, that will talk about what the city is thinking in terms of future TIFs?
Well, we had met with them sometime in August, and both Ms. Masterton and I had made a comment to Mr. Trozine and Marilyn that we probably need a follow-up meeting to the August meeting when they discussed some TIF 2 options. I do believe at last night's TIF meeting they presented the options. They began to discuss the option of whether or not they were going to look for an extension on TIF 2 or allow TIF 2 to run its course and look to split it and create another TIF. I do think we want to follow up and talk to them about that particular issue. We had also asked them, and they had shared, I don't know if they're in a position yet, but we are also interested in knowing the big picture of what other potential TIFs the city is looking at. We know from listening to Mr. Borchert that the city believes that TIFs are the economic engine that they use to increase revenue for the city. So I believe that after the first of the year, Ms. Masterton will follow up with Mr. Trezine to set up a time for another follow-up meeting so we can stay on top of this.
Mr. Collins.
Just as a point of clarification, what Mr. Borchert did discuss regarding TIF number 2 is that they actually has a couple of options that the city is thinking about. And option number 1 would be to release early some of the properties in TIF number 2, and then ask for an extension from the taxing bodies for, I believe, another 11 years of the remaining undeveloped properties in TIF number 2. A second option that the city is considering is dissolving TIF number 2 early, and then therefore releasing those properties that have already been developed to the taxing bodies, and then applying to the state for a brand new TIF which would last, generally TIF is 23 years for those properties that are currently undeveloped. So that's 2 options that they're thinking about that I think they'd like to discuss with the taxing bodies a little further.
Was there any time frame that was brought out as far as how to proceed with those 2?
Now, I think they're still trying to figure that out, and will come to us as soon as they have a few options.
Just to piggyback on that, if I could just add, what they showed us a map of TIF 2, and there's about a 90% part of it that is still what they're considering underdeveloped, and the greatest and best use of that the land has not been achieved yet. So there's a real motivation for them to continue to work. Yes, good work has done on part of TIF 2, but there's still a large industrial part that they haven't been able to develop like they would. So that's the motivation behind looking at ways to continue on, because they're not confident that before the end of the TIF they could, it's such a big area, 90% of it, they're not confident they could get it done. So Ms. Masterton had begun working on some preliminary numbers for how that might impact us, and if properties are released versus extension, just the different scenarios. And I think we're just going to need to keep a close handle on the financial impact that potentially could have on our district.
Mrs. Conroy.
Mr. Carlquist and Dr. Krizik and I also attended the Intergovernmental Board meeting this week, and I would say the most interesting thing that came out of that, and that this is the first time it's been mentioned, is the splitting of TIF 2. And I think that's something we want to seriously look at. It's got some real strong possibilities for us.
Mrs. Duroni.
When would TIF 2 expire naturally?
7 years from now.
We have reached the end of our agenda. I will accept a motion to adjourn. Moved by Ms. Hirsch. Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Conroy. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? This meeting is adjourned. So thank you to everybody who participated, and again for the very enjoyable music tonight.